Hi, I'm Scott Rothkopf, the Chief Curator at the Whitney Museum, and we're here at Jasper John's Mind Mirror, which is a retrospective that I co-curated with my friend and colleague Carlos Basualdo at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The show is happening here and in Philadelphia at the same time, and it covers 67 years of work, doing the math, because the show is changing even as we were curating it over the last 5.5 years, across every medium: prints, paintings, sculptures, drawings, and you've got over 500 works between the two venues. It's a lot to see. It's a comprehensive look at Jasper Johns, and I'm going to share some of my favorite works in the show. This wall is actually a kind of timeline of Johns' prints that starts in 1960-ish with that target you see at the end, and ends in 2021, which is the final work in the show. It's hot off the press, bad printing pun, that shows that Johns is still making new art even though he's 91 years old. He goes to the studio all the time. His mind keeps ticking, taking on new ideas. I think when you look at this wall, one of the things that's sort of most exciting to me is just the incredible range and breadth of the imagery, the colors, the scale. Everything that's happening here is kind of like a trailer for what you're going to see inside the show. So when we were putting the show together, we were thinking not just about individual works that we wanted to show, maybe the most famous icons, but also about stories we were going to tell through the exhibition itself. And one of those stories that was really important to me was thinking about Johns' relationship to the artist Robert Rauschenberg, who was a great influence on him, was his romantic partner for a time, sometimes his collaborator, starting in the mid-1950s. And in 1961, the two of them actually made a kind of definitive break in their relationship. And all four works on this wall are from that time. And they are some of the most sort of sad, angry even works of Johns' career. I think of this almost as a kind of breakup wall. You see this work that says the word liar in it. You see this work called Good Time Charlie. The cup's upside down. People thought of Rauschenberg as a good time guy. He was a little more ebullient and outgoing than Johns, who's so reserved. Here you see Painting Bitten by a Man, where Johns actually bit into the wax surface, this kind of sense of aggression to me. And then this chilly endpoint, Water Freezes, where you see a thermometer actually embedded in the painting with those words. And that sense of cold, sad, anger, lament is really a kind of, I think, beautiful and powerful emotional testament to these works. So we're in a gallery right now that's looking at flags and maps. It was kind of one of the key galleries I think that we always had in our minds. We would have flags and maps in color on one side of the room, and then in black and white and gray on this side of the room. This kind of face-off maybe between two different takes on America, a country that's divided, a country that's, you know, symbolically kind of fraught. Sometimes you think of things as being really festive and patriotic, and other times maybe the darker side of this country and some of its internal troubles and also the way it exists in the world. This is a painting that I really like to think a lot about because it's such a strange take on the American flag. You see it in the complementary colors. Instead of red, white, and blue, you have green, orange, and black. You know, it feels like kind of toxic, weird, a little scary. At the top, you have this flag in these colors, and down below, this almost ghost flag in gray. When was this flag made? In 1965. When you think about the 60s, they're one of the most turbulent eras in American society. You had, of course, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War, the Vietnam War, and all of these different ideas of the country kind of coming undone feel like they're part of this work to me. So in our show, we have two galleries dealing with the idea of places where Johns has lived and worked. In Philadelphia, we're looking at the idea of Japan, and at the Whitney, South Carolina. What do these paintings have to do with South Carolina, or this print and this painting, I should say? You might wonder. Well, over here, you actually have a reference to the home that Johns grew up in, his grandparents' house, which he redrew the floor plan of from memory. This whole painting is kind of about memory, colliding with the real. You see a painting of his own turned upside down, image of a friend's son that he traced a shadow of, galaxies, this whole idea of the past and the present meeting in different ways. This print that's related to that also includes this kind of upside down painting leaning against a wall, but now it's full of a galaxy. And you see also an old picture of his family hanging kind of alongside a work from his own collection by the artist Barnett Newman. Both these works, I think, really speak to the way that Johns plays with history, memory, place, in really beautiful and creative and also super personal ways. So this painting, according to What, is one of my favorite paintings in the whole show, maybe even in Johns' career. It's also one of the most complicated. You see him bringing together ideas he'd been exploring throughout the 1960s, thinking about the way that language and painting, writing, drawing, printing, sculpture all come together in a single work. You've got these letters that project off the surface describing the colors red, yellow, and blue, which are of course in the work. You have this incredible sculptural element that's this upside down chair with the cast of a leg of actually one of his art critic friends. This sort of hidden reference to Marcel Duchamp, whose profile you see here, an artist that was really inspirational to him. This flap actually can close and you can latch it on the surface. And if you look over here, you actually have this element projecting off the surface, almost flying off, a spoon stuck on a hanger. The spoon's casting a shadow that's of course not real. Well, it's a real shadow, but it's not a real part of the painting, alongside a hanger that's both a physical object and rendered on the surface. All these plays with reality and artifice, perception, thought. This is really what sort of like the core idea of Johns' work to me. When we were researching this exhibition for the last 5.5 years, we were able to see most of the paintings and works in the exhibition, but actually not this one. It's from a private collection in Seattle, and I was super excited when we unpacked it from the crate because I wanted to see it for the first time. It's called Harlem Light. It's from 1968. I think it's one of the big surprises in the exhibition for me. The sense of joyous kind of openness that it has is so great with this kind of glowing bit of color at the center. You see Johns playing with so many different ideas about representation and texture. Over here, he's actually sort of faked this flagstone motif that he saw on a wall in New York City. And over here, he's imprinting actually a window frame directly on the surface. So you have this sense of architecture and kind of the built environment, this sort of mural scale of the work, but also this glowing, open sort of sky-like space at the center. It's in a gallery where we are recreating the 1968 show that Johns had at Leo Castelli. That was his longtime art dealer, a place he showed for, I think, almost 40 years. And in here you can see that the room is kind of small compared to a lot of the other rooms at the museum. We've hung things rather low, actually, which is how Johns showed them at the time. And we even paint a little edge at the top of the ceiling to suggest that the ceiling was lower at the original gallery. We wanted to give people a kind of step into a time capsule of what it would feel like to have been in one of Johns' shows in the 1960s. So Jasper Johns is one of the most interesting printmakers of the 20th century anywhere in the world. And this show really features a lot of his prints. This is a room of monotypes, which is a kind of certain way of making prints where it's a unique work, each print, made from drawing directly on a plate and then running it through a press. You don't have an image stuck on that plate the way you do with an etching or a woodcut. So everyone is totally different from any other, even though they look kind of the same. He's playing with variations of the Savarin can, one of his key motifs. You see the sculpture of it actually at the center of the gallery. He's touching the plate in different ways. I love this one where his handprint is actually all over the surface of the work. He's really putting himself into the art. As you look around the room, you get a sense of the incredible experimentation that he would do in the print studio. It's almost like you're in an artist's studio or maybe in his head. When you get sort of to the end of the cycle, you see this word that appears, hallelujah, like, wow, I've made it. All different details like this kind of starry sky are made actually by flecking little bits of turpentine on the plate so that the ink dissolves. The final two in this room are what's called a counterproof. That means that he made this print first, then he put another piece of paper on top of the print, ran it back through the press, and kind of opened it up, if you could imagine that, which is why this print is reversed. The whole idea of Johns' use of printmaking is one of the key aspects of the show. You saw it on the opening wall, and it continues throughout the exhibition. So this is actually the very first Jasper Johns painting I ever saw in my whole life. We borrowed it from the Dallas Museum of Art, and I grew up in Dallas, and I remember looking at this painting a lot when I was a little boy. I would go to the museum and stare at it and think like, what are those things going on up there? And now, you know, I understand that one of the most interesting aspects of Johns' work is the way that he often includes the making of the object as part of the object. So what these slats are, which have little screws on them, are devices that he used to actually help make the painting. The painting's called Device, and he moved them in order to kind of blur the paint the way you see, almost like a windshield wiper. That's something he played with in a lot of his works, things that were printed on, things that were stamped, objects that include even the cans that he washed his brushes in. That sense of how a thing came to being, living inside the thing, is one of the sort of key ideas in his art. So when you're a curator, you think often of the big stories an exhibition's going to tell, but also kind of side plots or smaller moments. Bad pun in this gallery, because it's actually about Johns' small works. The whole time I was working on this exhibition, I kept thinking how unusual it was that Johns, as a contemporary artist, had throughout his life made super tiny works, often showing some of his most famous motifs like numbers, like targets, like flags. It's pretty uncommon for an artist to do that. Often they make a little sketch or something, but these he considers real paintings, real drawings. A bunch of them actually he made to give as gifts to friends, and they have beautiful inscriptions on them, sometimes on the front like this one, sometimes on the back. This one has a great story. He actually gave it to the artist Ellsworth Kelly, who was a friend of his, when he went over for Thanksgiving dinner. And it's a tiny little drawing of actually one of his paintings that's in the Philadelphia part of the show. So one of the funny things about curating a show of an artist's work is that when you start on a project, you don't necessarily love all the artist's works equally. You know, I came to Johns with this appreciation of the flags, the targets, those iconic images, and maybe I had a little trouble with these works from the 80s or 90s that were so weird. I was like, what is he doing at this point in his career? But the more time I've spent with them, the more taken I am with a sense of imagination, curiosity, the way that he's mixing things from his personal life, his memory, also with references to other art. Here you're looking at a painting called Montez Singing. Montez was the name of his step-grandmother, who partially raised Johns and actually used to sing a song called Red Sails at Sunset, and you see the little red sails there. The painting has this surreal feeling of almost being a face looking in on itself. You've got two eyes, a mouth, maybe a nose, or maybe a Mona Lisa mustache like Duchamp drew. Or you could see it as a landscape with a mountain, a cloud, a sun. That whole feeling of a painting kind of being read in different ways and being open to all this kind of complicated projection is something that happens at this period in Johns' work when he's so free to experiment and explore. So this gallery is another space in the show that I always had in my mind, and it's been so sort of thrilling to see it come into focus. You've got the Hudson River over here. We're looking west across to New Jersey from the museum, and a group of sculptures that were made pretty recently in all different metals. You have silver, bronze, copper, and they really show how the metals change in the changing light of the day. At sunset, this one looks absolutely beyond. And in the evening, we light them from above with lamps. And over here is the biggest of the reliefs in aluminum. It's a series of numbers that count, actually, I don't know if you do Sudoku, but it goes in both directions, across and up and down. And it's one of Johns' most used motifs. You see a whole gallery of that in Philadelphia focused on numbers. I love in this relief all sorts of personal details, the footprint of one of his friends, but also this may be reference to Duchamp, an artist who he cared a lot about, with these two keys. Supposedly when Duchamp was cremated, they took the urn and rattled it around and there was some noise inside, and maybe they left the keys in his pants when they did the cremation. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what my colleague at the PMA told me about this work. So this is a painting that was actually begun decades ago and then was stolen from Johns by a longtime studio assistant and later returned by the FBI. In the original painting, what you have is a shadow that was traced from Johns' own shadow, so it's almost a kind of self-portrait. And after the work was returned, he added this skeleton on top with the face and the little hat. It's a kind of complicated picture, right? Because the sense of the skeleton reminds me of betrayal, but also, of course, death. And yet there's something kind of funny about the smiling skeleton and a little hat. And it shows me the way that Johns can mix these emotions in his recent work. So this gallery is kind of telling the backstory of Johns' relationship to the Whitney, which goes all the way back to the 1940s when he first visited our very first museum on 8th Street. We're now on our 4th museum, if you can imagine that. I love this little drawing of our icon from the collection, the 3 flags, on the back of an envelope. I love the sense of an artist just kind of looking around his studio, trying to find things, you know, making a sketch, a note. Another sort of great detail is in this case, we have a photo album that shows an Easter egg hunt and actually a Johns egg that he dyed. This was a hunt that happened at the studio of the founder of this museum, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. You also see his friend, the artist Cy Twombly, and this sense of artists kind of living their lives, having fun, mixing their work and, you know, whatever they're going to do on an Easter Sunday afternoon.